So this final session of the 2022 National Ocean Exploration Forum will be a synthesis panel, which will feature our distinguished panelists summarizing and synthesizing what they've heard over the course of the last few days as it relates to the blueprint and the future of the ocean exploration enterprise, and maybe even some of ocean science writ large. Kristen Yarincik, the Vice President for Research and Education at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, will moderate this discussion. And we have a very esteemed panel who I know you will learn a lot from today. So Kristen, if you and the panel can come to the stage.
All right. Thanks everyone for sticking it out to the end and for being with us here, both in person and those of you joining us virtually. As you know, the first National Ocean Exploration Forum in 2013 came up with its vision for what the ocean science community and the activities that it conducted would look like in 2020. We're a little bit past that, thank you COVID, but here we are back to identify what the next 10 years looks like and focusing on what those goals and milestones for the community should be. The community involved in ocean exploration has grown and changed over the last decade, but I think we've heard here this week that we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we have diverse groups with a seat and an active role at the table. This panel here has the privilege to lead us through a summary of the information that we've heard over the past couple of days and this morning, identify some of the key takeaways that they've heard, things that have resonated with them. I'm going to each let them introduce themselves before their remarks, but they're going to lead us through this discussion. We've already heard a lot of the common synergies through the breakout discussions and panels, and what we'll focus on here, or maybe what are those common threads and synergies that we've heard across all of the discussions over this week, the major things, and those things that are gaining some momentum and energy behind them. So these panelists' remarks are meant to seed a final discussion. So when they're done speaking, I encourage all of you in the room and virtually to join into the discussion. We don't necessarily need this to be a question and answer period, but really have your comments enhance the conversation, keep it going, make sure that you in your remarks are continuing to elevate to the forefront those things that we really want to capture in the report as our milestones and goals, the things that we all want to continue to build that momentum around going forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. Cameron, why don't you go first?
Okay, Cameron Hume. I'm the chair of the Ocean Exploration Advisory Board, but I'm really a layperson. I spent 40 years in the State Department and often going to places and doing things other people didn't want to do. And I was grateful for that. So I spent most of the time here listening, and I'm very grateful to the speakers who've gone before and what they were able to share with us. One of the themes that I heard a lot about was the need for a story. And I've been wondering, story, trying to imagine a good story. And so my mind kept going back to the movie Casablanca because I always liked seeing it. I've seen it 15 times. And I usually come away learning something from it I didn't know before. And so I think that's a good story. And what separates that from all of the other stories that I've seen in the theater or on the TV that I forget about by the time I stand up to get something to drink? And what differentiates it is there's this sort of bad good guy, and we don't know what he's going to do. Sometimes it looks pretty doubtful. But underneath it all, we think he's going to do the right thing. And of course, in one twist after another, he does do the right thing. And so he inspires us in a way. It was a fight against Nazism, but he inspires us in a way. And I think that's one of the keys that you have to keep in mind. It's not just getting a storyteller. It's not getting it's not a technical question. How can you transform what you want to do into a story? But if you don't have an aspirational goal, you don't have a good story. And if you don't have an aspirational goal, I think you will find it very, very hard to motivate young people. So I tried to listen in the course of the 2 days to what kind of aspirational goals could we look at. I think of what Dr. Spinrad talked about, and he certainly put the challenge down. He said we ought to be willing to take risks to do things that are important. Well, I agree with that. And so I'm going to put out a couple of ideas that I got from listening to other people. They're not, jumping out of my own head, but they're from this discussion. One is the question of mapping the data, the organization of the data, the access to the data, the maintaining the data. And this comes back to credibility. I've heard this discussion since the first forum. There was one forum about 5 years ago that concentrated on it, and I've heard it now. Well, Dr. Spinrad, solve that problem. Put a stake in the ground and say that within 2, 3, 4 years, there will be an articulated plan that will tell people how to acquire, to store, to organize, and to make accessible that data. Do it. Yeah, you're the federal government. You're the people with the taxing authority, but you can do it with other elements of our society and with international partners. That is part of trying to finish the NOMEC plan, which there's a commitment to do by the federal government. But it's also the area of the ocean beyond our EEZ. There's an opportunity working with others. There are people, Larry Mayer was talking about this, Vicky Farini. There's an opportunity to work with others in the international arena, the Japanese, Norwegians. We haven't committed to do this, but they've taken based on public information that's been offered and organized, they've gone from 6% coverage to 26% coverage. Well, let's get the United States and the way we're organized as a society, we have a government, to make a commitment. We too are going to play in that. And then 5 years from now, when there's another meeting like this, people can say, gee, we put a stake in the ground and we got someplace. We put a goal out there. We inspired ourselves. We found solutions we didn't know that were available. We cooperated with philanthropy or with the private sector, and we got someplace. So that would be the first thing, to make that data permanent, to make it understandable, to make it accessible for not only our own citizens, but for in the international arena for other people's citizens. The other thing I'd like to pick up on from Dr. Spinrad is saying, okay, we should have a blue economy. I'll leave out whether it's aquamarine or some other kind of blue, but it's fine to say that, but how do you, if it's not specific, how do you do it? There has to be a value proposition. There has to be something that that motivates other people, a kind of inspiration to do things. So we don't know the answers to that yet. It's sort of at the frontier, but I'll put out 3 areas where I think we're close enough to the frontier that if a commitment is made to pursue them, within 5 years, you'll have real answers. Maybe not real answers to your initial questions, because you learn things and change your questions. One of them is, how do you take information about ocean currents? What information do you want about ocean currents? And how do you use that to enhance the ability of the Weather Service to predict climate conditions, whether that's where the jet stream is for influencing weather, and particularly water levels in farming areas, or whether it's jet stream areas for transportation requirements, whether maritime or not. This can be done, but it has to be made accessible for the users to identify it and be able to, if you want data to be the basis of your strategy, it must be accessible for the users. That's one area. Another area of potential focus, I think, is reinsurance. You don't have to go to a NOAA meeting to understand that if you're living in a high-rise on the beach in Miami, you're in trouble. But there are lots of other implications where it's not so clear. As the ocean level rises, ships will not be able to go under bridges. The Navy won't be able to use its docks in Norfolk. So I think, and that's all sort of tied into the reinsurance industry. They want this kind of information. Why don't we see if ocean information could work with the reinsurance industry to try and predict over 5 years how we gradually could shift our infrastructure. The third area that I just put out there is food. Whether that's aquaculture or whether it's where the fish are moving. We heard the fish are going to the poles, good for the fish, but a lot of the fishing communities aren't at the poles. And how can ocean exploration, gathering information about the oceans, help people who are looking for food in the ocean, or people who alternatively are planning on aquaculture or trying to identify proteins in plant life in the oceans that could be part of a more sustainable diet. I think these are things the administrator wanted, specific things that could be focused on. Maybe it's not the three that I said, but let's from the rich kind of conversation here, I think we should go back, we should put a couple stakes in the ground and say, these are things to look at, because if you do that, you'll understand why you want to know more about the oceans, because it'll influence the price of food, the availability of food. It'll influence how you travel. It'll influence where you put your house. It'll influence most of your life. 72% of our planet, all of life comes from the ocean. And we ought to find ways to understand how that impacts average people in their lives and in their economy. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks. Mike.
Harku. Map Semumowicz. My name is Mike Khus, Kakti Mike Khus. I'm from the Northern Chumash Tribal Council, California, Central Coast. I thank you for inviting me here and participating in this. This is my first forum and my first opportunity to meet with people in this community, this ocean exploration community. I should tell you that as a coastal indigenous people, we too have a maritime heritage, and that our people were, when the Spanish first encountered them on the central coast of California back in the 1500s, they took special note of our tamals, our specially constructed plank boats made from the redwood driftwood that would come down from the northwest and land on our shores and beaches. And our boat makers crafted those pieces of driftwood into planks and constructed seagoing craft. And they weren't as, we didn't venture as far out as the Hawaiians did. My tip my hat to them, but we love the ocean, and we still do. Yes, so my takeaway from this forum, I did a lot of listening, but let me tell you, what I take away from this. As you know, many Native American people have stories, and every community, including this one, has stories. We have our various purposes for those stories. I think that the pattern is the same. Usually the pattern is the same. It goes something like this. It's risk, failure, perseverance, success, or maybe in your case, discovery. And then the storytelling follows. That's the pattern. And my people are all very much familiar with that pattern. We have many stories. In more modern times, after contact with Euro-Americans, as you well know, we had a lot of failure and a lot of disappointment. And, and yet, I wouldn't be here today if my family and my people, my clan, my tribe hadn't persevered. So let me tell you a story. Some 40 years ago, my elders, including my mother, Palula, found out about something called the National Marine Sanctuary Program. And, they said we need to have a marine sanctuary in our homeland because our brothers and sisters, the alakoi, the dolphin, the whale, all the marine mammals, the fish, they need protection. We saw, pollution. We saw overfishing. We saw so much disregard and disrespect for the ocean and our shoreline. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I don't mind bragging about it, where I come from. So our elders said, we need a marine sanctuary here. Now, who had ever heard of an Indian travel group proposing a marine sanctuary? And yet we did anyway. And guess what? We failed. Didn't even get to first base. That was 40 years ago. And then in 2013, one of our WOTs, our chiefs, a man by the name of Fred Collins, he passed away last October. He said, we're going to try this again. Because we need it. And so he put a compelling package together. And he mobilized not only our people in our community, but also many people in the public. Because when the public found out, when they heard about this proposal and they found that we were the ones that were pushing it, not the federal government, that resonated with them. It captured their imagination or attention, because for many people, indigenous people, it in the mind of the public, it allows them to remember and recall how things used to be. And they associate many of our environmental goals and objectives that we talked about so much today with us. So Fred Collins, our chief, our WOT, he mobilized us, he mobilized the local community. And he put together a package again to NOAA. And this time, NOAA accepted that nomination. But that was just the beginning, because now NOAA came back and said, well, you're gonna have to show us some public support. You're gonna have to show us that you've got some backing for this. It's not just one little, unrecognized, federally unrecognized tribe from the Central Coast of California. It's not enough. And we did. In the Federal Register, I think there's over 90,000 comments, public comments that were made, 95% of them in favor of the marine sanctuary. It's amazing, remarkable. And so that got us past that first hurdle. Now we still have a ways to go. We're not done yet. There's no guarantees of success. We're going to persevere. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going with this. And I've had a chance to meet here with people who can help us with that. And I appreciate all of the good feelings and support that NOAA and even people in the private sector. My good friend over there, Kevin, I've spoken to many times over the forum, and others who have been so willing to go ahead and extend their hand. Risk, failure, perseverance, success, discovery, and then follows the story. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be an explorer. That was my dream. And like many childhood dreams, you kind of lose it over time. And yet coming back here to, for this forum has given me the opportunity to meet people that are living that childhood dream that I used to have. It's amazing, the work that so many of you do. And I'm going to take that home to my people and explain to them, like, yes, there are many good people who are working in the government, who are working in the academic community and working with NGOs and the like, who can be our allies in this good cause that we have. There are so many stories that you and your community have that are very similar, that follow the same pattern. I think that when people hear these kinds of stories, it inspires, it motivates, it provides models for others to follow. And we thank NOAA, and we thank all the people in the political sphere that have advised us and supported us along the way. And then we'll continue to do so, because I think that in just a few years on the Central Coast of California, we're going to have a new national marine sanctuary. So thank you.
Priyanka. Good morning, everyone. My name is Priyanka Hooghan. I'm with the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology in the U.S. House of Representatives. Much like Mike, this is my first forum. I'm a relative newcomer to the field of ocean exploration. It is an area within our committee's jurisdiction, given the large R&D aspects here. And our committee is really very interested in seeing how we can help this program at NOAA and at the federal government, broadly speaking, grow and kind of enhance the work that they've been doing, and kind of how do we kind of push the needle forward and continue to grow this field. So this forum has been an exceptional place to hear about some of the outstanding questions that remain. It seems like we're at kind of a pivotal point within the field of ocean exploration based on some of the discussions I've been hearing. Maybe it's time to reevaluate the language that we use around exploration. Maybe it's time to reevaluate how we talk about data, and are the needs for ocean exploration data-driven, or should they be discovery-driven? And these are themes that I've actually heard kind of across the field in the scientific enterprise, but I think the field of ocean exploration in particular is unique in the way it can really captivate the public and the attention. I think we have all either been in the shoes thinking that, wow, it's amazing to see these underwater images of the beautiful coral reefs, of the different colorful fish species that are out there. it captures the imagination in a way that is sometimes hard to replicate in other scientific disciplines. So I think that's a really big advantage to this field and how we can kind of drive public discourse and engagement. And I think it also provides a really great opportunity to push forward on the discussion of change in this field. How do we engage more with the public? How do we build trust with our different community partners and stakeholders? I think this forum is fantastic in the breadth of stakeholders that have been brought together here. And a lot of discussion on how we engage with Indigenous communities in a way that is respectful of their knowledge and also helps to build that trust. And that trust building is not an overnight process. It's something that will take time and will take repeated interactions. So having opportunities like this to come together, I think, is a great step towards building that trust and building it across the broad stakeholder community, which spans academia, which spans private industry, which spans philanthropy and the federal government. So that's been really interesting to see how these discussions have been playing out in our various breakout groups. I love the ambassador's point about really trying to put down a stake for some ambitious goals, the 5-year goals, the 10-year goals, the milestones, and really just encouraging people to think big and think boldly. Because I think having that bold vision is what will take this field to the next stage. And I think it can also broadly apply to the marine science enterprise as well. I think ocean exploration is a really great avenue to engage broadly across different societal aspects. We've heard about how it can be an opportunity to work to address climate change, how we can use ocean exploration to talk about the blue economy, how we can talk about diversifying our STEM workforce and building that new diverse workforce that can really kind of propel the country forward. There's been a lot of talk about innovation in Congress. I think this is an exciting space for that. We've talked a lot about the unique technology that already exists, but also, as Dr. Spinrad mentioned, we really need to do some high risk, high reward research and really talk about failure, talk about risk, and see how we can grow in an exponential way as opposed to kind of a slower way, which is the way a lot of research does tend to take place. So I think I'm really looking forward to the overall outcomes from this forum, to really hear what is that bold vision, what are those significant goals, and how Congress can help support that, help grow this program and enhance it, see if we can use it as an example for other programs within NOAA, within the federal government, and how we can really just leverage this diversity of stakeholders that's in the room and really leverage this community that is quite close knit, but I think you are all pushing each other as well. I think there was definitely strong discussions in the breakout rooms and they weren't all comfortable discussions. And I think that's really important to continue the growth in this field. So I am really looking forward to this discussion. I do hope it is truly a discussion and appreciate the opportunity to be here and to take this all in.
Thanks, Priyanka. Jeremy.
So brief introduction, Jeremy Weirich. That's it. Thank you all for letting me participate. And again, thanks for letting my team participate and be a fly on the wall. This has been really good for me. The timing's been perfect for me, actually. Coming on in right when I'm starting and get to revisit old friends and catch up with new ones. There's a lot I took in, a lot of different topics we covered. I could talk about anything from data management, the data pipeline, focusing on the US EEZ, what exploration does look like in the future. I think before I hit any of those, I think there's a common topic and theme or items that fall within one pot for me that I want to highlight. And that is, I think what I would characterize as the ethics of ocean exploration or the ethics of exploring. Some of the things that I've heard are, creating a code of conduct for engaging local communities, including Indigenous and tribal communities, developing community engagement plans early and on the front end of a mission, the same way we develop project plans and cruise plans, and then follow through at the end. Enabling a community to understand government material, policies, and procedures, value citizen scientists and non-science feedback, And in doing so, be conscientious about top-down messaging. Evaluate the environmental aspects of a project's activities and technologies. Just for example, are there biodegradable gear that we can be using, especially some of these sensors that just go out there that we'll never see again, but are providing us with really valuable data. Now, a final one, and these are just examples, is that before any expedition, create a contingency protection plan for shipwrecks and other cultural maritime heritage material that could be discovered on OE-sponsored missions. Don't let that be on the back end. Some of these are new items, and then some of these have been part of a conversation that's been going on for too long. I want to have the next conversation. I don't want to have the same conversation again. So there was a lot of goals or objectives on there that were in the 5 and 10-year plan. Let's move all those over to the left, and let's start doing those right now. And there's no reason why we can't. That way we can get on to the next conversation. Like I said before, I like having NOAA or NOAA Ocean Exploration be the pointy end of the spear for NOAA. And what I mean by that is we're on the front end, we're cutting edge. But we can do that for exploration technology, but there's no reason why we can't do that for diversity, inclusion, equity. And so what's good for the NOAA workforce could be good for all the other workforces out there. So let's try it. Let's try doing some of these things. So when it comes to accountability, that's a big deal that plays into this. And so for me, accountability goes both ways. And I can talk about accountability with all of you and the data that we expect from you and the deliverables that we expect from you. But when it comes on the other side, I've heard about accountability for the federal government, for ocean exploration, for me. So, we talked about things amorphously to some extent, but let's talk about something tangible. So what we're going to do is add an Indigenous representative to the Ocean Exploration Advisory Board. We have some members rotating off. Unfortunately, we're going to be losing Ambassador Hume, but we're going to be gaining some other members, and we don't have that representation. So let's get a nomination in there for that. I don't control who is on the board, but I do control who can be nominated. So let's make that step. That's something that's in my power. So let's continue to have these conversations, and that way we can, like I said, get to the next conversation. And I'm going to pause there. There's other things I can mention or talk about, but I'll hand it back over. We can get the discussion going.
All right, thanks. And we're about to turn it back over to all of you for your input to this discussion. While you're getting your thoughts ready, I do have a question for the group. So we're here at this forum talking about ocean exploration, but a lot of the things we're talking about, we're hearing in discussions across the entire ocean sciences community. Building diversity, equity, and inclusion, access to data, engaging with our Indigenous communities, facilitating innovation and the new blue economy. What is ocean exploration? Where does it fit into this? What are those strengths that exploration has that puts us in a position to really lead or set an example in some of these things, versus what are those things where we really should be having these discussions collaboratively across the community more? Jeremy, maybe I'll have you start with that.
It's a big question. And I think we've touched upon that in this forum. So we can come up with standard procedures for mapping, and we've done that, and we're doing that. And there's some of those already exist, and we're trying to apply those to the deep ocean. Rachel, for example, has been trying to spearhead a lot of that stuff, and you're going to see more of that. We talked about data standards here and the need for data standards and technology standards. We have examples of that, but we need to move forward on that. I would argue that we have standards for characterization. If you wanted me to photo mosaic a shipwreck, I could come up with an SOP for that. If you wanted to acquire some organisms on the bottom of the ocean, there's a standard operating procedure for that. But what we don't have is a standard operating procedure for how to explore the ocean. And that's okay. If anybody who's been working at the sea has a platform, whether that be a ship, an AUV, a plane, if you have technology and sensors, if you have people on the front end for planning, executing, and then following up. And then you have objectives. Those all go into how to explore the ocean. But those variables all change depending on what you have available and the type of people. And I'm not interested in the bureaucracy of exploration. I'm not trying to put everything into a box. What I want to encourage everybody is to continue to focus on balancing different priorities and objectives and being flexible while we're out there. That is extremely important, because if we're rigid, we're not going to be able to explore the ocean and we're going to miss stuff. I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a story. And I'm going to ask Dan if you can pop up my slide. This is something I put together very briefly. It's just 3 images that I thought about this morning in terms of how to characterize this, just as an example. Early on when I was doing exploration, in fact, this was the first mission I did for ocean exploration. Sanctuaries in the Office of Ocean Exploration were looking to map an area off of Michigan. That's what you're looking at here. And that is Thunder Bay, and Alpena, Michigan is right there in the bay. I'm stopping short from saying Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary because it wasn't a sanctuary yet. They needed to map the area and they needed to characterize what's in there. And what's unique about this place is that there's a lot of cultural heritage down there. Shipwreck Alley is a term that's been used. And there's a lot of shipwrecks there, but there was talk about protecting it. There were some concerns within the community, and we need to get some baseline imagery. So working with Dr. Ballard's, at the time, now it's Ocean Exploration Trust, at the time it was something different. And Dwight Coleman, I don't know if Dwight's still here, but Dwight was the chief scientist for that mission. And we went out and had a side scan sonar to map this area. Well, I got tagged on. I was still with the Office of Coast Survey, and I was the hydro geek. I was the guy who could bring in the hydrographic software to help process the data. And so working with Dwight, we figured out a plan on how best to map this area given their new technology. And that's basically mowing the lawn. Well, we had a good plan. We started up in that lower southeast corner and deep water and started going. And those track lines that we had were about, I want to say about 20 miles long. They're long. And the equipment that we had really kept us going about 3 knots, 5 knots. So we're just steaming and dreaming, just going and going. We had a finite amount of time to acquire the data, and we weren't going to cover the whole area. We were going to try, but we probably couldn't, but we were going to get as much as we could. Well, what ended up happening is I'm processing the data. When you process the data for hydro data, you see the lines first. You don't necessarily see the data, it's the track lines. So the first day we probably did about 3-4 lines. Second day, I'm processing the data and I see these squiggles that go way up into the north area. And I'm asking Dwight, what happened there? He said, oh, well, we had some targets that we had from the locals, that the local dive community wanted to see something that was up in that area. And we happened to be on that far edge. And so we figured we'd go check it out. Okay, sounds good. Processing the data still, and there's these squiggly lines all in the data. I'm like, well, what happened there? And they said, well, we ended up finding a shipwreck and we just wanted to get some better imagery. So we did some other turns to get clear pictures. Because for those of you who don't know, the side scan sonar is basically taking black and white images of sound and actually creating a nice, it's not really imagery, but it provides what looks like imagery on the bottom. As we're going along, we're realizing that we're finding some shipwrecks here and there, but we're kind of close to the end of the project. And so what ended up happening is that we wanted to see some of these other shipwrecks. So Dwight decided to just break survey and hit these other wrecks. And what ended up happening is the spaghetti is all over. It's just willy-nilly, but we got some pretty good images of wrecks. Next slide, please. That's pretty much what the survey looked like. So for the mappers in the room, and there's a lot of mappers in this room, by the way, and I'm a mapper. What you see, it starts off, that's a pretty decent imagery of 100% overlap. But what you may or may not be able to see is that there's a lot of spaghetti in there. We're going outside the track lines. We're going outside the boundaries. Let me go to the next slide. So this is what it looks like over that area. And what we have is some of the shipwrecks that we looked at. And this is what I'm going to get into real quick about balance and flexibility. If all we did was just do those track lines starting in the lower southeast corner, we would have found 2 unknown shipwrecks and we would have had imagery of about 5 or 6 wrecks that the locals knew about. That would have given us a pretty good chart for sanctuaries to begin with. In fact, we probably would have been able to get more track lines, but we wouldn't have been able to see anything that would have been of significance. Remember, this is the first survey in this area. They were hoping to have other surveys, and they needed the community buy-in on a project that was very controversial. So what we needed to, all those other spaghetti lines, the value of that is that we were hitting targets that the community knew about. If you're a wreck diver in Michigan, you're seeing a wreck like this. At best, if the visibility is really nice, you can maybe see a little bit further out, but they had no context of what these shipwrecks looked like on the bottom. And they didn't really have a context of what the shipwrecks actually look like from stem to stern. With these imageries, we could paint that. When we brought this back to the community, they were ecstatic. They would have been ecstatic with the 2 unknown shipwrecks, but they were ecstatic by seeing other things that they knew about, but they were seeing in a whole new light. And that community engagement is what ended up helping to get the sanctuary created. It got that support down the road. So why is that important now? And you can take that down if you want. How does that play in to where we are today? So if we are going to be mapping the US EEZ, and the Okeanos, I'm just using Okeanos as an example. If we're out there just steaming and dreaming and going out there, remember the US EEZ is, these boundaries are set up from geopolitical reasons. These are islands out in the, let's say the middle of the South Pacific that came out there from legacy issues. They weren't created because of any intrinsic value for exploration, but there could be some cool stuff out there that we're gonna find. And that's the value of going out and mapping. But we have to be able to color outside the lines. We have to be flexible. We have to be able to chase a seamount chain or chase an underwater canyon outside the lines. We also have to be able to interrogate other targets that may not be within the survey, but may be important to the community that are local nearby and we can hit. And that's going to be important for telling that entire story, which is what the ambassador was talking about. Data doesn't tell stories. What we produce is what tells those stories. So I'm encouraging everybody as you work forward, as you come up with all the bits and pieces that go into exploration, continue to find balance and continue to be flexible. And I'm going to pause there.
All right, thanks. Yeah, the risk taking we're hearing about ocean exploration is a great platform for taking those risks. Do we have input from the Auntie?
Hey, Monty Graham, Florida Institute of Oceanography. Great job, you all. These kinds of things are, I think, really what get the juices flowing. I'm going to build off of you a little bit, Jeremy. So a few of us coming from the ecological world have experienced various forms of what we call synthesis centers. So I'm going to throw that word out there, and then I'm going to come back and maybe define it. But this could be a thing that is on that 5-year time scale. It could even be a thing that you might want to focus on in a future forum. In the spectrum of science, the very first part is observation, right? It's just looking. And so at its core, ocean exploration is that, it's that very first thing in a longer process. Lots of data being collected, being put in a bucket. We're trying to figure out ways to engage and access and get those data utilized. But we also have an opportunity to lean on that as a group, more than just scientists, as a community of everybody that's got an interest in this, that we can lean on those data in a very synthetic way. And I would say not on the back end, but on the front end, and let the front end process of talking about that in a physical space. These synthesis centers are physical spaces. And so I would really argue for ocean exploration having a physical place where people can come in, synthesize on the front end, develop the thoughts and the ideas that may inform science or may inform, future exploration.
Thanks. Any responses from the panel or, in the audience to that?
I think one comment I would have for Monty's, and I agree with them, creating that space on the front end. A lot of things are an afterthought, and we have to take care of it on the front end before we actually start collecting pings. I would argue too that we should have something on the back end on how best we can deal with the data afterwards and do more with it. We talked a little bit about that in some of the breakouts yesterday, but I would like to see more discussion on data archiving and how best to use the data archive. Yeah, go ahead, Dan, why don't you put up this next image? I wasn't planning on putting this one up, but we talked about it just in case. Data archiving. What I'm showing you here is the Hubble Space Telescope publications that are done based on Hubble data. And for those of you who don't know Hubble Space Telescope, basically if you're a PI, you put in a proposal, competitive proposal, and you get time on Hubble, and that can be 2 hours, 3 hours, or it can be 4 months, depending on the project. And it's just like, and I don't want to draw too much analogies, but it's kind of like getting ship time. And then what are you going to do the ship time? What do you publish afterwards? What's interesting about the Hubble archives and the reason these colors change is because in the beginning, a lot of the publications came out because of the PIs getting time on their exact, whatever allocation they had. And by the way, NASA, what they do for Hubble is they help to get you funding for your time, and they give you funding to do all of the other work that goes with that. There's a grant that goes with it. So supporting postdocs, supporting data management, data publication. Some agencies don't necessarily do that. So it's something that I'm considering as we work with ship time. But what's interesting is that as time went on, you can see where the colors change a little bit, sometime around 2002, 2003, where things flipped, where there was more publications and more interest based on the Hubble archive than was actually being published by the actual time on telescope. And that continues. It's going to get to the point where Hubble is now over 30 years old. And that's a pretty impressive slide. Not only that, but what about other space telescopes? So the Hubble Space Telescope, that science is managed in Baltimore, Maryland. A lot of people don't realize that. But there's other data from other telescopes that are going into that archive. And all of that is playing into, because they have data standards and because they have consistency with that and they have a consistent data pipeline, it's amazing how much of these other publications are being used based on archive. Is that something that we could do? I don't know. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to have too much of an analogy out there because there's some things aren't going to go just right. But what is it that we can do with our data? What is it that we could do with our Okeanos data, our Nautilus data, our partners? Bring that all into the hopper. Could we do some really cool stuff with that? I bet you we could.
I'll just add on to both Monty and Jeremy. I think one of the other things that came out to me throughout the forum was the need for intentionality. And so I think that kind of touches on all the different topics that we discussed, but when it comes to the data, being intentional about data, because I think a lot of times, we hear this on the committees, we just need more data. We just need more observations. We just need to put out more equipment, right? We need more satellites, we need more Argo floats, what have you. But on the other hand, you hear that we're not even utilizing the data that we currently have. We're not even able to really dive into the archive data and pull out usable information. I think Dr. Spinrad touched on this in his talk, and it's something we've really been focusing on at the committee, is trying to figure out how to provide, in the climate context, climate services. So it's not just raw data. Having raw data available on a website helps very few people. Perhaps the academics in this room will know how to deal with that data, but the general public will not know how to access it or what utility it provides to them. So really thinking intentionally of who are your end users, what are their needs, and how can we build a product or a service to help meet those needs? Because that also helps you do the that public engagement, public education of what it is that ocean exploration is doing, what it is that NOAA is doing, what it is that the philanthropic organizations the private sector, the private industry, and the technology that they're working on, it really helps you get that message out and tell that story better. So I think data to support the story needs to be very intentional, and really focusing on end users and what's the end goal of that data, not just collecting data for data's sake and putting out, more monitors just because we can.
I want to add one more comment because you had a great point, because there was discussions yesterday about data driven and what that meant. And I'm not a data driven guy. I'm more of a results driven, because we acquire so many different type of data, but we also provide or produce data products, deliverables in other meaningful ways. And how do we catalog that, and how do we use that? I thought that Vicky and Colleen's paper, the white paper, which talked about data in a new world, there was many good points in that. And there was good points at the very end, the 5-year, 10-year stuff. This is another example of, we should be able to pull all that stuff over to the left. And actually, I'm facing you the wrong way. Pull that all over to the left. So, because that way, these things just seem very easy, or I shouldn't say easy. They seemed to be defined very well. And I think I saw some agreement throughout this group, which isn't common. Saw some agreement on a lot of that data stuff that we just pull over and start making these changes to help manage our data better.
Great, thanks. Other, oh. Larry?
Okay, thanks. I wanted to thank the panel. I think it was really a wonderful way to kind of capture many of the things that went on over the last few days, and I think ended in a very nice and inspiring way. And I don't want to provide a downer, but I want to turn to the question of funding. And when we hear the inspirational challenges that Ambassador Hume and Dr. Spinrad presented to us, to think bold, to really try to move the needle and do things different and bigger and take risks. I asked the question, and Jeremy, you start talking about, do it as soon as we can. The 2023 budget is already out. We're thinking about 2024. And I think we seem to keep getting stuck in this rut of just incremental funding and building in constrained budget. So I turn to Priyanka and Jeremy, based on your past experience. How do we move that needle? How do we make that quantum leap? How do we bring the critical needs that the oceans have to levels of funding that NASA has? Is that conceivable? Is there a mechanism?
I think the storytelling is really important. I was discussing with the other panelists earlier, we have a lot of members on our committee that don't live on the coast. So how do you make the case that the ocean is important for them inland? How do you make the case that it's important in urban areas, in rural areas that aren't along the coast? And being able to really convey that message strongly helps to build the case on the Hill. I think I encourage all of you to engage with your members of Congress. That's a really important step. It's something before I came to the Hill, didn't realize that you have a lot of access to your members. You have a lot of access to the folks on the committees of jurisdiction. Jeremy has a long history on the appropriations side, and I'm on the authorizing side. But we are I'm making the effort to come here, but as you can see, I'm the only one from Congress here. So the effort needs to also come from the community to engage the representatives in their legislatures, because if you don't tell them the stories, they're not going to know that this is an area that we should be looking to grow our investments and looking to grow that field. I'm not an ocean scientist. This whole ocean science, marine science, ocean exploration is very new to me. And let me tell you, there are a lot of people like me on the Hill. So you do need to be very engaged. Again, public engagement, it can take on a variety of different paths. And so I think definitely keep in mind how you engage with the folks at the federal level. Just because you're doing great work, you're doing these conferences, you're releasing papers, if that's not communicated to the people making the decisions, it's going to fall on deaf ears. So I would just say, make sure you take that translational step and really do that engagement.
I might add just one short note to that. I had mentioned this previously, but I'm going to reiterate it one more time because I think it's appropriate to this point in the discussion, is that the indigenous people in the can be helpful and can be allies with you in this respect. because they carry, I think, as I mentioned before, indigenous people are associated with the way things used to be and nature and pristine areas of our world. And if you can, gain their support, they have a powerful political ally. Because, I think that we carry a certain amount of credibility that perhaps other people may not, or they simply because they don't know you. But my experience has been when I worked with Bureau of Land Management on the Carrizo Plains National Monument, I work with, government people there. My experience with them is that they are highly motivated, very skilled, and sincere in their interests. And that captures, that attracts me to them and wanting to support what they're doing to protect that monument. And so the same thing can work for you. But you have to extend yourself out there to the indigenous people in the local communities, just like Jeremy was talking about. It's not just indigenous people, it's local communities. If you can capture their, loyalty by demonstrating sincerity and purpose, really meaningful purpose. I could go on forever, but a warning here is that for many indigenous people, we've had too many experiences with anthropologists and archaeologists going out and ripping off our sacred sites and walking away with that data, walking away with whatever it is they got and never doing anything with it that's meaningful or ever returning anything of benefit to the people whose land they're exploiting. That's a form of colonialism and it's continued up to this day. So I in response to that political type of, the budget yes, I've heard that many times talked about here too, is a lack of money. When we talk to the local NOAA people in my part of the country about our new national monument, one of the first things they mention is that, well, we're lacking a budget. We don't have enough money to do everything that we want to do. So yeah, it's a difficult situation, but I think that the public, if you get that public support and the indigenous people, local community on your side, you can get politicians' attention.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's also very much related to the resources and funding discussion. A lot of the setting of priorities or program planning and engagement that we do is through events like this or activities that really require the time commitment of people. And, we have a historic tradition, I guess, in the ocean science community, probably across the sciences and academia, that we're volunteering. A lot of us are here volunteering time to these kinds of efforts. But when we're trying to engage with voices that haven't traditionally been part of these discussions, they're not going to have time to commit for free to these kinds of activities. And so making sure that we find a way to adequately resource, if that's a priority, we need to resource it as such.
I'd like to address Larry's question a little bit. There isn't a good answer. I think we all have to ask ourselves, how does the federal government operate? How does any organization that huge, how does it make decisions and allocations of money? And I'm sure other people would have very different answers, but I always felt that if you wanted, in my experience, if you wanted resources or if you wanted a decision, you had to start with an idea. Start with a process in which you say, I am going to sell an idea. I am going to convince other people this is important. I'm going to convince other people that this is doable. I'm going to convince other people it's in their interest to get up, to see it in parallel. We can all move forward together. You start with the idea. If you don't have the idea, you won't get the money. And if you have the idea, you never, ever stop. And most days you'll fail. And one of the experiences that crystallized this for me was I was in Indonesia and I was asked to, by an undersecretary, we have to change how we do outreach, public outreach. So, okay, I formed groups in the embassy and we talked about how would we do this. We did focus groups with young people in Indonesia. So we went back and we said, okay, we're not doing some program at the embassy because the target audience isn't there. It's stupid. We're going to do, we said, let's put an office of the embassy in a shopping center, shopping mall, because that's where young people would go to hang out. Oh God, you can't do that because you can't make it secure for government employees to be there. So you said, we don't care. We'll hire Indonesians. We'll do a contract. So that's sort of the joke too. Rather than employees, you have a contract. You have a contract to a private entity. Fox News actually bid on this contract. They had a good offer, but they didn't win. And we ended up getting the money and doing it. But what we were told in the process was we were told we can't pay for it. I said, why? And the answer was because we didn't do it last year. But they had asked to do something that they knew they hadn't done last year. So you have to be undaunted when people say things like that. And you say, oh, that's very nice. We want to do it anyway. We're going to talk to somebody else. We're going to sell the idea to a different person. It's very hard, but you start with the idea. And that's one of the reasons meetings like this and discussions like this are so important. Because we all feel, I think, after 2.5 days here, we have a little wind at our back, you know? There are other people who realize this is important, whether it's for Mike's people in California, whether it's for somebody on a ship, or whether it's for somebody who needs that data in order to figure out where they're going to send their fishing fleet. So I would say if you want money, if you want something out of the government, start with an idea and don't stop.
All right, so thanks to the panelists and thanks for all of you again for sticking with us through what was an interesting and exciting couple of days. What happens next? A report will be developed. The report will try to further synthesize what we've been hearing, identify what these milestones and goals are. That's the first step in identifying metrics. I don't know.
Just want to let you know we have time for more.
Oh, we have
questions
time.
and comments.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
My eye contact signals are not working.
Sorry. For
All
the
right,
bright
one more
lights.
question. Do we have a virtual question?
We actually have a virtual comment
Okay.
from Chris Sholin at Imbari. He says, to drive the kinds of partnerships and support being discussed, we should, as a group, articulate the top OE priorities on a regional scale. That provides a basis for defining requirements and advancing workable solutions. This also offers a means for showcasing why addressing a particular problem is a good value for the public at large. And just a comment that we wanted to pass on. But we do have time for a few more questions, and I believe
great.
George, you have one on deck. Go ahead.
Dan, I'd just like to pick up on that. I've been struck in the time that I've done this that there's too much of a disconnect between state, local governments and what the federal government does, at least from what I see from it. And I found it encouraging that the gentleman from New York was asking for information because they were going to try and do something with the New York community. I think this is an area where, again, a lot of progress could be made. Going for governments at different levels, because while we may not look at it that way, I bet people in Congress look at it that way. So, that's another place. You got an idea, sell it anywhere.
Great, thanks. George?
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks is really what I wanted to start with. This has just been an amazing. So as the eyes, ears, and heart and soul of the ocean, as one of the ambassadors, I just want to thank you from the ocean for being here. More importantly, though, this group is loaded with data people. And I've heard so many comments about where we're going to put it, how's it, and all that. You need to probably start typing this down. Ditto. That's the UN's digital twin of the ocean project. There's about 300 groups in it now. I signed up 15 more groups at South by Southwest just recently. People are doing VR game work. That's going to become the virtual twin of the ocean. And all of this data, every level, everything is going to live there so that we can engage all of us in almost realistic experiences. So people who've never dove before are going to get to go what it's like underwater, which is what we've needed for a long time. That's the big problem. Nobody knows anything below the surface of the water. And that's, we can look to the space and we can connect to it. Nobody connects below that. So that's ditto. That's all you got to do is Google ditto, digital twin ocean UNESCO. That'll get that. The other site that everybody in this room needs to be plugged into at the UN, UNESCO, is the forum.oceandecade.org. Forum.oceandecade.org. That's the Facebook of UNESCO, IOC, all the stuff, the endorsements. It's everything to plug into community there. I can't overstress the importance of being there. You get a weekly newsletter after you get accepted, and that's the place to plug in. There's funding stuff, all of it, resources. It's the one place to go if you want to be part of the big project. So I just wanted to share those things. And because I've discovered, even though 5 years ago I did the search, if you're from Texas, that's the reason I wore this shirt today, so I'm easy to find. If you're from Texas, especially Austin, come find me, get my card. We're going to have a community here now. So that's it.
All right, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
And who do I take it to, Dan?
Okay, yep. Dennis.
All right, thank you. I just want to congratulate everybody that's been, here today and up on the stage today. It's been really a wonderful outcome for a meeting that I've been sitting going, what the heck's going on around here? Because, I'm from the outside. I came to represent UNOLS, but I'm an ocean research scientist. So I have a very different perspective from so many of the panelists and that sort of thing. And so, one of those perspectives I have is data. Al and I were talking about data this morning when we were competing for some of that breakfast. There are a lot of data. There are a lot of data out there from the research community, and it's being generated all the time. There's sensors being deployed all the time. So there's a massive community. There's a massive intellectual capacity out there that really is not well represented here. There's a number of us from that community, but I don't think we're here because of that, right? So let's not forget who our potential allies are, and it's all the ocean science, research science community who know so much and have so much capacity, right? So I think that's important. So, and so as a scientist, I've been hearing the word data a lot. Data. To me, it's variables. Data for what? What are the variables? And what's the goal? It's to increase understanding, right? So that's what we do as research scientists. We want to understand personally, that's want to understand how the ocean works as a natural system. That's just a driver for my professional career. And we motivate it with climate impacts and all that sort of thing. But we need to have that kind of a question and aspiration for the data that you want. And that aspiration then dictates the variables that you need to observe. As Monty was mentioning, it's the observing capacity and capability that we need to be focused on. Observing what? So, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves with, data release, data management, data this and that. What data? As a scientist, I'm saying what data? And so I think that's pretty important. So, and then I was hearing the Ambassador Mike and talking this morning about, what the opportunities are. It is what I was listening for. And it's really opportunity space that I want to understand, because we from the Ocean Science Committee, we're doing all this stuff. Where are the holes? Where are the gaps, right? Because that's what this community, I think, is probably trying to fill. You don't want to be competing with the big oceanographic community. You're trying to fill the needs. And so the ambassador listed some needs, you know, the reinsurance industry. What do they need? Have we had that conversation? I lived in Bermuda for a number of years. I know a lot of guys in reinsurance. And so, you know, those kind of questions could be asked. That's a stakeholder group that we should be communicating with. And maybe the OE kind of opportunity allows us to communicate less on the research side, but more on the, you know, when you talk about a societal need, what does reinsurance need? What is Mike's community? What knowledge, new knowledge, Mike, do you need for that coastal system, you know, that you want to generate with the scientists? You know, what could the scientists help generate knowledge-wise? What variables need to be observed to get to that point? So I think that, you know, I think picking out or pulling out that opportunity space relative to everything else we already do is pretty important. You know, identify that. And this is not just, this gets beyond, you know, exploration in the most traditional definition. You know, it's looking for that opportunity beyond, that goes beyond just exploration, right? It's a broader capacity of that concept anyway. So that's what I want to say is I'm excited because I think, you know, again, I've been, you know, sitting and talking to other ocean research scientists say, what are we talking about? You know, what's missing here? And I think from some of the comments today, I see what's missing. There are very specific opportunities for new knowledge generation that the allies, those being professional research scientists, can help with, right? So, but those people aren't here really. You know, we're not here because of that capacity. We're here for other capacities. So, just some comments, you know, and I'm excited with where you know, this has come so far today. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
And Kristen, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll move into closing remarks. So, Naya.
Hello. Aloha mai kakou, good morning. My name is Naya, founder of Salted Logic and director of Big Ocean. I guess this is a bridge question because everyone's talking about data, but then we're also talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, intentionality, storytelling. And to me, that's on that side, there's data that's social science data. So I'm just wondering, you know, for OE and for NOAA, what is that commitment to social science data? And just to build off of what you were saying, if the data kind of dictates, right, our processes and our approach, I think social science data calls for things like intellectual property. You know, it forces you to really think about how that data is collected and managed, and free prior informed consent for Indigenous communities. And Jeremy, I really loved your example of Thunder Bay because you're mapping and discovering these shipwrecks. And depending upon how you think about culture, the social science data is all the stories right behind those shipwrecks. So I think that it might be great to have more bridging even within this data. That data isn't just the ones and zeros that you're picking up mapping on the floor. And that might be a great way to bridge some of these. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on social science data and the role that that plays.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gets into my, one of my values, which is results driven, not data driven. And so we're going to be acquiring all different types of information. And how do we package that? How do we distribute that? And this goes in not just for the societal, social science aspects of it, which, my background is marine archaeology, that storytelling, that connections, I know that well, but there's other ways that we're going to have to take that type of information and deal with it. We're going to be taking risks. We're going to be taking technology out into the ocean and losing it. I mean, that's going to happen. I think it was Justin that said, fail fast and fail often. I'd like to fail smartly. And for our British folks in the crowd, failing smartly doesn't mean I'm going to be looking good doing it, but it means that we're going to be, actually having a head on our shoulders as we strategically break stuff. But we're going to learn something from that, and it's not going to be data. So how do we distribute that? There's other people that are interested in that. So I think that there's going to be a lot of different users that we're going to have to bridge to. And I think we're going to have to stay creative on how best to do that. So I think we're going to keep an open mind.
I'll just speak kind of, I will look at NOAA R&D programs broadly, not just ocean exploration. And there has been a pretty strong commitment to incorporating social science, especially on the mission-driven aspects of the agency. We see it a lot in the space of the National Weather Service, the importance of understanding how to communicate forecasts, because you can have a very accurate forecast, but if it's not communicated to the community, they won't know to evacuate in a timely manner. So I think that's a great example of the importance of doing that bridging, like you were talking about, from kind of your standard data that comes out of scientific endeavors and making it accessible for people to understand, and especially how to convey that data in a way that can encourage the public to engage, encourage them to take away a certain message. And I think that is a very, very important concept that you brought up. And it's great to hear Jeremy thinking about being really open-minded for ocean exploration and how that can, transcend multiple scientific disciplines, and that can include social science as well.
Other thoughts? All right, time to wind up for real this time. All right, so thanks again for being here. The report is going to be drafted, and we'll try to be further synthesizing what we're hearing toward milestones and goals, as I said. First step in identifying metrics and making sure that those, this accountability we're talking about is there, and especially that accountability toward the values that we want to hold and demonstrate as a community. So everyone, all of our participants, live and virtual, will have an opportunity to weigh in on drafts of that as we progress. But